I am happy to have you here on the COREnology podcast. Thanks for being with me today. I have David York and Denise Buckley, who are both part of my team. And I am so excited to have them talk about practical uses of the COREnology assessment. We talk so often about using the assessment and getting values and vision. And Denise specifically works with so many families talking about those things. So I have her here to represent that piece of it. But then how do we wrap that around and talk about how those values and vision actually turn into the principles and practices that you use, the applicable side of this? And David York is the perfect person to have on our podcast today to discuss that side of it. So my hope today is that you see the whole circle of having our values and turning them all the way into practice. And Dave, you always use a term. I'm letting you say it because it's your phrase.
I have so many phrases. I don't know which one you're talking about.
You just said it's values to.
Oh yeah. As I like
Yes,
to say,
thank
we
you.
always want to have purpose drive planning, and we want planning to support purpose.
I did not set that up very well. That was
That's
a
okay.
me problem, not a you problem. You would have totally jumped in if I had
Yeah, no
that better.
problem.
So
Yeah.
as we open the door to discussing this, how is it that financial planners, they care so much about values and vision? How does it bring that planning into being? Let's start with you, Dave.
I think, unfortunately, I think so much of life we see on a bilateral basis, and we think of purpose and vision and the ideal, and then we think practicality and retirement plans and savings and investing and capital allocation. But the reality is we don't live in these bifurcated world. We are human beings going through the experience of wealth and wealth transfer, and that is both deeply, deeply human and also very, very practical. And I think by and large, most of us in the financial planning space come from a more quantitative perspective. We're more tool driven. We tend to be more asset focused. And there's nothing wrong with that. But so often we forget the human side of this and the experience of building and accumulating wealth, the value that that has to us, and then the desire for positive impact from that. And so I really think it's important to look at both. And to me, it's like the difference between hopping and walking. If you think about how far can you hop in life on one leg, it's not actually very far. In fact, the world record is 3 miles. There's a guy in New York City. He set the world record for hopping at 3 miles. I think I could make it 100 feet.
Actually, just last week, did an exercise where I had to hop, and I
Yeah.
made it like 60 feet. So
Yeah.
barely,
Yeah.
barely.
It's incredibly
It's
difficult.
really hard.
But to walk, you know, most of us could walk 10 or 20 miles. If you've gone to Disney, you've walked 20 miles a day,
Totally.
right?
It's worth it.
And the world record for walking in a day is 180 miles.
Incredible.
But it's just the difference between two versus one, right? And I think so often when it comes to wealth transfer, we hop. We might have this vision and this idea, but we don't have any structure behind it. Or we create these great structures, but we fail to bring the human element to it. And so, what I really enjoy the most about the COREnology and working with Denise is I really feel like we can walk with our clients as opposed to just hop with our clients. And Denise does so many great things on the human side, but then we try to match that with what we do on the planning side to create something that's honestly much more sustainable than if you just had one or the other.
So you guys work together often because Dave, you have all of your clients go through the assessment, and Denise takes that assessment and talks directly to the client before they ever meet with you.
Yeah.
So what does that look like, Denise? How does that, I'm just thinking of structure. If somebody's never heard of COREnology, what does this mean to them and what do? They go, they send an assessment, they get the information back to them, and then what do you do with them, Denise?
I love David's analogy. I think I get to help them start that walking process. And so often they're like, wait. Tell me again that this is really going to connect to my financial plans. And if I meet with their kids, they're like, tell me this is gonna help with this. And I love sort of the relief that I see from families with that. Like, okay, this doesn't have such an in the box thing outside of our family. This can be part of who we are. So that's how we start. We start with saying, okay, let's look at each member's core values. What's important to you? Very often families know that generally about each other, but for each person to say, these are my top 5, and here's the reason why, sometimes that's really great stories for kids about their parents, perhaps because of experiences or how they were raised, and connecting some dots that way. It's also really empowering for parents to hear why their kids picked their top 5. And let me tell you, mom and dad, I really like loyalty. I had a family recently who the son said, oh, loyalty is my number 2. And mom, it's because of an experience when you stood up for us when we were accused of eating gum and we didn't. And so that was really neat for the mom to be able to hear that, share that. So we take them through that. We talk about their top 5 shared values. We talk about how that fits together in their family heat map, and some other parts, the culture, their views on wealth, what are some of the obstacles, what are their priorities, and really then trying to tie that into what David will do with them next, to get them thinking about, okay, this is what we've just verbalized about your family, and David's going to help you actually actionize that into
So then
your estate
you
plan.
have this information and Dave gets it, and then Dave, you meet with the client. What do you do then?
Yeah. So, the way I kind of analogize it is wealth transfer, wealth planning is like a journey. And if you're going to go on a journey, you need to know 3 things. You need to know where you're going to go. You need to know where you are today. And then honestly, the planning is the easiest part. But honestly, so many clients don't actually know where they want to go with their wealth. They don't really have an understanding of where they are today as a family. And so it's like me selling thermal clothing and blankets and all of that for someone who's ultimately going on a trip to Hawaii. It would make no sense, right? It would just be foolish. And we would never start packing for a trip without having an idea of where we're going and what we're going to do when we get there. And so what Denise does is she helps clients think through, who are we as a family and who do we want to be, both definitionally and then aspirationally. And then I say, okay, let's figure out how we're going to get there. And so in our estate planning, we do a couple of things. One, 99% of estate plans, and I'll challenge anybody to go look at their estate plan and read it. 99% of estate plans are just incredibly generic. In fact, if you took off the first page of a trust and the last page of the trust, most people could not actually identify their trust. And so we start in our trust by identifying what the core values are of the family. And we say, trustees, beneficiaries, read everything in here in light of these values that we have. We want to remind us of who we are before we start to talk about what we have. And then we look and say, okay, how could we align that purpose with planning? How could we take some of the assets and the resources that we have and advance those shared core values? So I have clients who value determination or knowledge, and oftentimes we'll set aside funds for multi-generational education. So the successive generations have the opportunity for an education. Not necessarily because we just value education, but because we value determination, because we value knowledge. And those education is an expression of that. We have some clients who deeply value connection as a family, and we'll set aside funds for multi-generational family reunion, family engagement. We say, look, we value connection, so we want to resource that value. And really, part of what we're trying to model to the next generation is to resource what you value. The most engaged, the most impactful, most positive people in the world, they know what they value, and they pour their time, their talent, their treasure into those values. And really, why couldn't or shouldn't your estate plan do the same thing? And so we're actually modeling during life. And for a lot of my clients, we use it as much as a framework for how they live during their lives as just some estate plan that we pull off the shelf after they're gone.
So it has way more meaning to them than just, this is what I leave behind.
Why would we come up with a death plan if we're not going to come up with a life plan? Clients, that's much more valuable to them. Doing estate planning and making sure that your family is provided for in case you die is a great thing to do. And it is a bit of a selfless act because it doesn't necessarily provide you current benefit. It's designed to make life easier on the kids.
Mm.
But why not come up with a life plan while you're at it? And a lot of my clients, their bigger struggle than how do I leave money to my kids when they're going to be in their 50s or 60s when I die is how can I engage with them in their teens, their 20s, their 30s, their 40s. And so what I like about the work that Denise does and that we try to emulate in their planning is that this is really more of an action plan for the next 20 to 30 years of your life. This isn't just about how you leave assets when you die.
It's one of the things I love so much about what we do. One, in addition to that, we have an assessment that talks about obstacles to wealth, specifically working with parents and how different things that have happened or concerns they have in their life hold them back in their behaviors. And I just am curious, Denise, what you have seen with families, with the parents as you talk about these obstacles. And then I would love to hear from Dave about how you take that information and actionably change or make things different in their planning as a result. So, Denise, what kind of conversations have you had around that?
I love that segue because, listening to what David just said, I think going through this process provides a bit of freedom. We call it transcendent freedom in the report. But I think that's what happens. Families sometimes will come to this meeting. I often meet with the parents first before we loop the kids in. And they might not be ready to have these conversations with their children yet. They're not quite sure how they're going to feel or how much they should share. They haven't really wrapped their own mind around how comfortable they are with some of these questions. And I think when you start talking through, especially looking at values first, there's a sense of comfort of, I do know my values. Okay, I want to articulate that. There's strength in that. When we bring the family in, there's increased strength. We talk about family culture, where they're excelling right now and where needs a bit more attention. That also helps them feel a bit more confident. Like, okay, we are doing great on cohesion and identity. We really want to focus on what's our family impact. But we've given them language and direction with that concern. And even as we walk through the core views part of it, of what are our views on inheritance, what's our money story? How did we grow up? How has that influenced our decisions? How have we shared that with our children? Have we been intentional about some of these lessons that we've learned? Even just talking about that builds this increased confidence, I think, which allows for some of that freedom. So often after our first meeting, they'll leave and say, okay, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to talk to David and make a plan. And it's not, an A equals B, but there's this little bit of, okay, I can see this vision and I feel so much more confident and comfortable than I did before I looked at these things. I'm not worried about the future quite as much. I know the tools I want to ask for to be ready to do this. So I think it really comes down to that that freedom dive
Just
into what
going
comes
through
next.
the assessment with you, you're saying then remove some of the obstacles or concerns that they've had and frees them up to have better conversation both with their kids and then with David as they're making their plan. Awesome. I love that so
Yes.
much. And David,
Yeah.
when they get to you, what happens?
Well, it's interesting. The obstacles one I actually think is one of the most powerful. And it goes off of my belief that you need to diagnose before you prescribe. So much of financial services industries is about prescriptions. You need to do this with your money. You need to set up your trust this way. You need to have this amount of insurance. It's very prescriptive. And yet oftentimes we don't actually diagnose what's going on. This was actually born years ago. I was working with a client and we put together a tool called a GRAT. And the whole point of a GRAT is to try to grow assets out of the estate for estate tax purposes so they're not subject to estate tax. We set this up, and a couple of years later, it's a multi-year tool. The client came back to us and he was upset. He's like, this was too successful. This moved too much wealth out of the estate. And he was really anxious about it and really upset. And I was like, the tool did exactly what it was supposed to do. The problem is he had underlying concerns about the negative effects of inherited wealth, and that the wealth that was transferred to his kids was so substantial that it actually might be destructive to their self-reliance, their self-sufficiency. They might become more of a target. They may not be as engaged in life. So I thought I was solving an issue, which to a certain extent I was, an estate tax issue. But he had a more fundamental concern, is that he didn't think his kids were prepared to handle wealth. And I just transferred more wealth to his kids. And so that's when I realized, okay, there's more going on here than just that. And so we use these tools to help us, not just help us understand, help the clients understand, because so many of these are undercurrents. The clients haven't necessarily articulated them, but when they actually see it on the report, they're like, yeah, this is true. This is what I'm feeling. And what's interesting is we test for three obstacles: worry about the future, regret about the past, and paralysis in the present. And what's interesting is oftentimes couples have one or more of these, but they're not the same. So, for example, you might have one spouse who they're worried about the negative effects of inherited wealth. And they're like, we got to control this. We got to limit how much we transfer because the kids aren't prepared. Or they might have regret. I spent too much time at the office. I wasn't there for the kids. I didn't spend as much time with them. So they're writing checks today to pay for debt for yesterday. The other spouse, they may not be in worry. They're like, I know these kids. These kids are sharp and they're smart and they're going to do fine. They may not have regret. I was at all the soccer games and the piano recitals, and I was there and engaged, but they have paralysis in the present. They don't know what to do with the wealth that they have today.
Yeah.
And how to interact with their children today with that. And so the problem is, if you have one spouse who's in worry or regret, you have another one who's in paralysis. They're both anxious about doing planning. They don't actually know why. They've never actually talked about it with each other. But, the reality is studies show 50% of high net worth, ultra high net worth clients have never done estate planning. And I don't think it's because they're uninformed or they think they're immortal. By and large, I think they don't know what to do with their wealth because they're either in regret, worry, or paralysis. And they don't see a way out of that. And so they do nothing. And so part of what we're trying to do is just articulate that. And once you identify an issue, it actually becomes so much smaller and so much easier to address.
Well, going back to what Denise said, once she has that conversation with them, suddenly they feel so much better and they feel like, oh, I can do this. Oh, this doesn't feel so overwhelming, that it's solved before it even comes to you.
Yeah.
Do you?
And one thing that I really love about those conversations is oftentimes I get to see the couple solve that obstacle within our meeting, to bring it to light. For example, if somebody's high worry and the other one's not, perhaps let's say the husband's high worry is not, and she might say, you know what, I see you managing XYZ for our finances. I'm very secure. I can, see these strengths in our kids, and that conversation is happening in real time. And so the husband, sometimes it's because they haven't articulated this, like David said. And so the weight just feels so much more. But once you've been able to share, hey, this is what I'm worried about. Oh, I'm so glad we're talking about this because I'm not worried about that, but I have this. Oh, I've taken care of that. And so oftentimes I just sit back and I'm quiet where they're having this conversation that helps
Just
them
having
deal
those
with some of these
conversations
obstacles.
solves so many problems. But they don't know to have the conversation or what's even bothering them until they see, oh, the assessment is showing this could be an underlying issue. Now they get to have the conversation. And so it opens door to help them be healthy.
Yeah.
I love that so much. Do you ever see some of these obstacles to wealth? Suddenly they're behaving different than their core values. Like, I value independence, but I'm giving them all this money to pay for the regrets of the past. Like, and there's a conflict between their core value and their behavior as a result of these obstacles.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, this is sometimes one parent and not the other parent. Yeah, I see that. And, it's interesting when we got into core values and talking about understanding those, somebody told me once, and I'll never forget, they said, just remember within every virtue, there's a vice. There's an over exaggeration of every value. Sometimes in our desire to live out a value, we over emphasize that value, and it actually becomes to our detriment. And so when we have something like regret or worry or something like that, it can often twist a bit the underlying principles or values that we're trying to build on. So yeah, I think that definitely happens. And that's why I think it's very, very important to go through that side. And I know some advisors, they're like, oh, I want to shy away from anything negative or anything that might be upsetting to a client. You're not creating worry. You are simply bringing it to the forefront. And honestly, it's so funny. One of the biggest reasons that clients are worried about the effect that their wealth will have is that they don't think that their kids are prepared to handle it. And yet they're not actually doing things to help their kids learn how to handle it. And so this is where the financial advisor can play such a fantastic role, where we say, look, I don't think my kids understand the basics of finance. Okay, well, what if we help them learn the basics of finance? What if we sat down and
Well,
studies show kids, especially of high net worth and ultra high net worth, some of the most helpful things they've ever gotten, and it's a minority that are actually presented with this, is financial education courses taught by the professionals who assist the families. And so what we do is we actually start to provide that financial education. And then what happens? The worry actually goes down, and now we're actually in a position to better engage with the kids at these things. And so a lot of this is not the paralysis in the present is so often because I just don't have an articulated plan of how to engage with my kids when it comes to my wealth. Okay, well, you know what we could do? We could come up with a plan that helps you articulate how you're going to engage with your kids on your wealth. And so when you can work with a family and then you go back and you say, you know what, 2 years ago when we met, this is where you were on worry, and this is where you are today. This is where you were on paralysis, and this is where you are today. There's a reason they want you to, if you're going to go to the gym and work with a trainer, they start with a baseline, like, right, where are you today? And then we're going to measure to see what kind of difference
Yep.
we make. And so I just truly believe that we have clients for life. Yes, I think we do great estate planning. Yes, I think we help people with all that. But we have clients for life. because we help them reduce their worry, reduce their regret, reduce their paralysis simply by articulating it and addressing it. And it's not rocket science, but you can't solve a problem you don't know exists.
Absolutely. And one of the things, I mean, we have all these great assessments, but all of the assessments came from a need that you guys saw originally. So we have the what are your priorities assessment, core priorities, and that sometimes solves some of these problems. Like, I'm worried about their financial literacy. So, financial literacy is at the top of my priorities list. I'm giving a cheat sheet to the people around me, telling them what I want to get done without even having to have a conversation, which is, the list of priorities have come from seeing a need for knowing and understanding what the clients are looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, this is just the truism that we can do just about anything in life. We can't do everything. And then oftentimes, again, spouses don't talk about this. And so one of the things I love about the assessment is that we always recommend they do it separately so that they can each speak into these things. But hey, what are the top 5 things you want to address in the next 6 months or a year? What are the top 5 things I want to address? And then, okay, let's tackle these. And again, as an advisor, as a professional working with a client, how much value is there? Is, hey, you know what? A year ago, these were your top 3 priorities that you wanted to accomplish, and look what we accomplished when it came to those 3. I would rather have that conversation any day than how did your portfolio perform as opposed to a benchmark of a relative index, and what was your market volatility compared to this? Or, let's review your trust in the tax provisions that we have in it. You want clients to feel like what matters to them is getting addressed, and the core priorities is a great way and a simple way of doing that.
Absolutely. And it's funny to me because my husband and I, we talk about everything all the time, but we still do this assessment and things come up. And I think, I had no idea. How did I not know this? And we're so communicative. And we only have one child that doesn't distract us from having conversations. If you have more than one kid, I just have no idea how you get it done. So, this is for a couple a nice cheat sheet to open the door to knowing what's going on for couples before they even talk to their financial advisors.
And it's kind of fun because, you might have some areas of unity. Hey, we both really want to think about our statement. And then I often see, one is like, I want intentional fun. We need to go do something fun. The other person might be like, but I want to think about our communication. And so as I'm helping them reflect, you can do it all. Go have some intentional fun, but aside some time for, a family meeting or a family communication as you're doing that. And it's just a way for couples to sort of, like you said, understand what's important to each other and then work on it
Yeah,
together.
I love it so much. Now, I really love to keep our time at 30 minutes. And so we're running short on time, which means more than likely we should have this conversation again because there's so much to say. But as I wrap up today, what advice would you each give to couples as they walk into this process? First, Denise.
It's worth it. It is worth the family response and capital you're pouring into your own family culture. I have lots of clients who might be a little trepidatious as they begin, but almost always after, they are so thankful. And like I share, meet with a couple first, and then we bring in the kids after that. And they're always so excited for that second meeting. They're like, "This was great. I can't wait to bring in my kids or my in-law kids or grandkids and this together." So I would just say it's really
Awesome. I
worth
love
the
it.
time.
And Dave, what would you have to say?
Yeah, I would agree. And I would say this too. The kids want to have these conversations. The kids want to have this engagement. The kids want to hear your stories. And sometimes we need a framework for it. Unfortunately, the reality is many of us were raised by that greatest generation. They were also known as the silent generation. They didn't talk about money. They didn't talk about finances. Oftentimes they didn't talk about their life story. And so unfortunately, a lot of families, even who want to have these conversations, don't have a framework for it. So part of what we love is that we're creating the roadmap for them to have these intentional conversations and to learn. But it's profound, the ability to give those children and parents the opportunity to speak within a framework of something like values. And again, I think it's going to make everything else you do in life so much easier.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you so much. And if you're listening to this and you're wondering, I haven't done this yet, I'm so confused, give me a call. I'm happy to help you learn and understand more about COREnology and our assessments that we offer. If you are using COREnology, we are also happy as a team to help you use it better, get educated, and walk through the process of utilizing your assessment with you. So we are happy to be here. Dave, Denise, thank you for helping me as always get through these great
Anytime.
conversations. And we'll just talk about this again soon.
Sounds great.
Thanks,
It's
guys.
great. Thanks, Gretchen.
All right.